The great German philosopher Martin Heidegger once said that the things that are most difficult to think about are the things that are most familiar to us. This applies very well to the topic of my talk today, because what I want you to do is reconsider money. So money is something that we all use every day. We use it to buy coffee, we use it to get paid for work, we use it to pay our bills, and most of the time we tend to take it for granted. However, in this familiarity with money, a very crucial question tends to get lost. And it is the question, how is money created? In order to understand the economy, and in order to understand money in the economy, we need to start understanding that in our economy, we have two kinds of money. We have paper money, and we have electronic money, which is the kind of money we use when we use this kind of device, a payment card. Let's start with the easy one, this one. Paper money. Paper money is created by the central bank. We can read that on the banknote.
In the case of banknotes, the central bank is a monopoly supplier of banknotes. So the £20 note that you're talking about is an IOU from the central bank to you.
What exactly does that mean though? Does that mean that the Bank of England could give me £20 worth of gold in exchange for a £20 note?
Not anymore, no. While that was true in the past, the monetary system today is very different. While it is still true that the £20 note represents an IOU from the bank to the holder of that note, banknotes today are what's known as fiat or paper money. A £20 note is worth £20 precisely because everybody believes that it will be accepted as a means of payment, both today and in the future. And for everyone to believe that, it is important that the money maintains its value over time and is difficult to counterfeit. It's the central bank's job to ensure that that is the case.
If anyone else tries to create this kind of money, and if they get found out, they will go to jail for counterfeiting. Electronic money, however, is a little trickier.
That's right. In fact, banknotes and coins make up just 3% of the money held by individuals and companies in the British economy today. The remainder, and that's the vast majority, is held in people's bank accounts.
So how is the money in my current account different from the cash in my wallet, for example?
As we discussed, money is an IOU. So the cash in your wallet is an IOU from the Bank of England to you. And the money in your bank account is an IOU from your bank to you. For example, if you have £200 in your current account, that means that your bank owes you £200. And that money functions just the same way that the currency in your wallet does. In fact, today, most people get paid directly into their bank accounts and frequently use that money to pay for goods and services. For example, when you use your debit card at the supermarket.
The accounts that we have in our banks are called deposit account. And that may sound as if, okay, so this kind of money is just this kind of money deposited in the bank. And in principle, that could be the case. It is, however, very misleading in terms of understanding how money works in the economy. Because electronic money is created by commercial banks when they issue new loans. So how does this work? How do commercial banks create money?
This is how they do it, essentially. They make a loan, let's say a loan to Robert of £10,000, okay? Banks use double entry bookkeeping. Essentially, when a bank creates a loan, it creates both an asset, which is the loan, and it creates a liability at the same time, at exactly the same time. The liability is the deposit. A deposit is money. You can use it to pay your taxes. You can pay your taxes to the government with an IOU created by a bank, a liability. And everyone else in the economy will accept that deposit, that IOU, because everyone knows they can pay their taxes with it. It's that simple, right? That is money, okay? And the bank doesn't need anyone else's deposits to create that deposit, okay? It's just created that £10,000 by typing a number into a computer on the basis, mainly, of its confidence that you'll pay back that loan.
So imagine that I go into a bank and I get a loan of 1 million kroner. this loan will rarely be paid out in cash. So what really happens? Well, two things happen. The bank issues the loan and thereby records that now I owe the bank 1 million kroner. At the same time, they then credit my deposit account, which means that now the bank owes me 1 million kroner. The trick here is, however, that this account money can be used as money. In other words, it is money. So when I start spending my million kroner, I merely transfer money from my account in my bank to someone else's account in his or her bank. And in this process, the electronic money is not somehow transferred into paper money and then transferred back into electronic money. So essentially what happens when banks issue a loan of, say, 1 million kroner, they create 1 million kroner worth of new money. They simply add this to the total supply of money in the economy.
Professor Richard Werner, some of you may know of, he's Professor of Banking and Finance at the University of Southampton, has set up a centre down there to look at this area. He's an extremely talented macroeconomist. He's been trained in orthodox economics, and he spent the rest of his life destroying it, ripping it to pieces for its failure to incorporate money into how, and credit, and how that affects the real economy. He's written 2 best-selling books. He was working in Japan during the 1990s, saw the debt deflation, coined the term quantitative easing, and then watched the Bank of Japan implement the quantitative easing in precisely the way he'd advised them not to. And he's now watching the UK and much of Europe do quite similarly.
Essentially, you know, if we want to produce something, we need funding. So there's a role for banks in almost everything that's happening in the economy. But what exactly is that role? I'd like to reflect on that. Banks are being thought of as intermediaries, but this is not really what's happening. Banks,
what are they then?
They're creators of the money supply.
So you're firmly of the view that banks create money out of thin air?
Yes, well, I produced the first empirical studies to prove that in the 5,000-year history of banking. Banks are thought of as deposit-taking institutions that lend money. The legal reality is banks don't take deposits and banks don't lend money. So what is a deposit? A deposit is not actually a deposit. It's not a bailment. It's not held in custody. At law, the word deposit is meaningless. The law courts and various judgments have made it very clear if you give your money to a bank, even though it's called a deposit, this money is simply a loan to the bank.
That's true, yeah.
So there is no such thing as a deposit.
So you think it's probably inadequately named then?
So banks borrow from the public. Okay, so that much we've established. What about lending? Surely they're lending money. No, they don't. Banks don't lend money. Banks, again, at law, it's very clear, they're in the business of purchasing securities. That's it. So you say, okay, don't confuse me with all that legalese.
No.
I want a loan.
Yeah.
Fine, here's the loan contract, here's the offer letter, and you sign. At law, it's very clear, you have issued a security, namely a promissory note, and the bank is going to purchase that. That's what's happening at law.
Put it in layman's terms, what does that mean?
It means that what the bank is doing is very different from what it presents to the public that it's doing. How does this fit together? So you say, fine, the bank purchases my promissory note, but how do I get my money? I want, it's a loan, I want my
200 grand, right?
I don't care about the details, I want the money. The bank will say, well, you'll find it in your account with us. That would be technically correct. If they say, we'll transfer it to your account, that's wrong, because no money is transferred at all.
It's already
from
in the bank.
Anywhere inside the bank or outside the bank. Why? Because what we call a deposit is simply the bank's record of its debt to the public. Now, it also owes you money, and its record of the money it owes you is what you think you're getting as money, and that's all it is. And that is how the banks create the money supply. The money supply consists to 97% of bank deposits, and these are created out of nothing by banks when they lend, because they invent fictitious customer deposits. Why? They simply restate, slightly incorrectly in accounting terms, what is an accounts payable liability arising from the loan contract having purchased your promissory note as a customer deposit, but nobody has deposited any money. I wonder how the FCA deals with this, because in the financial sector you're supposed to not mislead your customers.
So is this a problem? And if it is, why is it a problem? I believe that it is a problem, and I'm going to tell you why. The problem is not that banks are evil or bankers are greedy. The problem is that banks are banks. So this means that they are governed by certain incentives, which makes them create money in a way that is not always, you could even say rarely, in line with the overall needs of the economy.
If banks create credit for consumption, it's obvious what's going to happen. You suddenly have more money created and more demand for goods, but it's the same amount of goods and services. So you're creating consumer price inflation. That's well understood. What's less well understood is, and what's the biggest in the UK, it's probably more than 70% of all lending, actually way more than that, is bank credit creation, so money creation, for financial transactions, for asset transactions, for purchasing ownership rights. Now then you have a problem. Why? Because you're creating new money, but you're not creating new goods and services. You're simply...
They're constant, aren't they?
You're giving somebody new purchasing power over existing assets, and therefore you must push up asset prices.
So if you can decide when to create new money, if you can decide how much new money to create, if you can decide the price at which this money is lent into the economy, and for what purposes it is lent into the economy, then you have enormous power, not only over the economy, but over society at large. So by privatizing our money system, the creation of money, we have essentially handed over a very vital societal power to the financial sectors.
Anyway,
I don't think the answer.
So the banks create the money supply by inventing these claims on themselves, the fictitious deposits. That can be actually positive for the economy as long as this money creation is in line with the creation of new goods and services, implementation of new technologies, and therefore adding value. And adding value in the economy is funded by this money creation. If that happens, and we're talking about business investment, productive loans, productive bank credit, you will have no inflation. These loans can also be serviced and repaid. You have a stable economy without problems and with low inequality.
So in the beginning, I asked you to reconsider money. And I want you to do this not just as a philosophical exercise, but also as a political reflection. So when was the last time you heard two politicians debating whether private corporations or the state should create all the money that we all have to pay, depend on for our daily expenditures, to pay bills, to pay our taxes and so forth? Never. Never. Because money creation and money reform, they are not part of the mainstream political agenda. No, these issues, they are reserved for technocrats in central banks at best and CEOs of private banks at worst. So ordinary people have no business interfering in these matters. So what I hope that you will take away from this talk are two things. One, I hope you will take away the confidence that you can understand and form a qualified opinion about money and money creation. And secondly, I want you to feel that you have a democratic right to at least be part of the decision of who should create our money in the future. Thank you.